Hi, I'm Richard Hill, and I'm here today to talk to you about shadow. Have you ever found yourself overreacting to something that you really shouldn't have been such a big deal, found it such a big deal? How about these three situations? Scenario one, the grumpy coffee shop teller. You present your loyalty card, all filled up with the record of former purchases of your favourite latte, expecting to get the free one today. The person behind the cash register, however, growls at you instead that you should have presented the card before she entered today's coffee and pastry into the system. She is so grumpy about it that you not only feel humiliated and incompetent, you also have the strong desire to throw the milky contents of that latte in her face and flee. Scenario two, what am I doing? You're a very faithful sort of person. You're in a good long-term partnership. The relationship is going along okay, although some other parts of your life, such as your work, are not. And you're away on a business trip and a very attractive client starts flirting with you. Before you know it, you had dinner, a few too many cocktails with this person, and you agreed to their suggestion to follow them up to their room. And as you wait by the lift, reality hits you and you go, what am I doing here? Scenario three, losing control. You're on a moderate diet to lose a few kilos, and you're doing quite well, avoiding temptations, eating sensibly, watching portion control. Then you go and stay at the home of some relatives who offer you a bit of chocolate. Not a food on the allowed list. You say, oh, no thanks, at the dinner table. But after everyone's gone to bed, you see the whole package of chocolates has been left out and you think, oh, I'll just have one. And unbelievably, you eat the entire box. The hidden component. Shadow. The hidden component of our character, which we have consigned to the dark recesses of our psyche. It comes out inexplicably and horribly at times, embarrassing us, surprising us, and if we're attuned to it, offering us the possibility of deeper insights into our true selves. And just as it does this with us, mental health practitioners whose stock in trade is self-awareness, you can bet your bottom dollar that so too does it affect our clients who may have only had a glimmer of insight into what they're dealing with. Over the next half hour or so, I'd like to help you to recognize when clients are meeting the shadow so that you can be maximally capable of helping them to mine the inner gold that may be surfacing, be it in a sort of a sneaky sideways manner. Now, I'll be defining shadow, I'll be explaining how it works, describing the consequences of acknowledging and also not acknowledging our shadow, and recognizing how shadow shows up in life. To do this, we must first examine how shadow comes to be and the role that projection has in colluding with shadow to undermine our wholeness. Shadow material is pretty juicy stuff. So take a deep breath, pluck up some courage, and let's get stuck in. Shadow, meaning our psychological or personal shadow, is a concept used by practitioners in so-called depth psychologies, such as those of Carl Jung. It refers to those qualities, impulses, and emotions that we cannot bear for others to see and thus cast into the hidden domain of ourselves. Shadow wears many faces. It's greedy, angry, selfish, fearful, resentful, manipulative, it's weak, judgmental, controlling, hostile. We could go on. This dark side of ourselves acts as a storage place for all the things that we find unacceptable in ourselves, things which we get embarrassed by and pretend that we are not, aspects which we do not wish to allow the world to see and which we do not often allow ourselves to see either. It lies concealed just below the surface of ourselves, masked by our more proper selves, remaining untamed, unexplored territory for most of us. How does the shadow come to be? The shadow develops naturally in all of us as young children. The first time that we have developed enough of a sense of self to register the danger in our mother's disapproval is probably the first time that we make a deposit to the shadow storehouse in our psyche. "Share the cookies with your brother, dear," she says. But the cookies are little and few, and we want them all. We wait until Mum turns her back, and then we greedily gobble up every little brother's cookies as well as our own. A deed which we then must hide because we know instinctively that we've done something unacceptable or wrong, and that the act, and the part of ourselves which was impelled to carry out the act, must be hidden, so as not to endanger our continuing existence in our tribe, and in the case of our little cookie eater, in the family. At the same time, we identify with ideal personality characteristics such as politeness and cleverness, or skill at sports, which get the tick of approval from our environment and social conditions. These qualities are sometimes called the New Year's resolution self. These parts of ourselves, which we are and know about consciously, we call the ego. The shadow is that part of us we fail to see or know. What you must ask determines which part of ourselves get to be ego and join the light of day, and which are relegated to the hazy realms of shadow. The combined influence of parents, teachers, siblings, friends, societal institutions, and others create a complex environment in which we learn what comprises moral good, appropriate behaviour, and what is mean-spirited, shameful, or downright sinful. What is allowed in one family or culture may be frowned upon in another, if not forbidden completely. Consider these examples. Anger is appropriate to own in some cultures, but not in others. And it's differently allowed between sexes. Sexuality is liberal and permissively expressed in some countries, but formal and restricted in its expression in others. Chicanery and clever trickery admired in some regions, whereas in other strict moral codes, there are strict moral codes that are aspired to. Yet in determining what is ego and what is shadow, we must still acknowledge that both are present within. Moreover, we must not make the mistake of thinking that shadow is only about our sinful side, the parts that we reject. Shadow is whatever we decide that we cannot accept into our consciousness, our awareness. Sadly, we are very active in storing away some of our most valuable gifts and assets. Our shadow storehouses are full of our deepest creative potentials, our special and most meaningful skills, not called upon by the world, and the most sublime qualities that we somehow cannot allow ourselves to claim. The shadow is our unlived life, the juicy, vital, universally human but also divine aspects that retain contact with the lost depths of our soul. It is shadow in this fullest sense that we look to explore here. The first thing to understand is how we come to create it, the mechanism by which we disown aspects, so essentially a part of ourselves. And we must look at projection. It's said that what we do not own owns us, a reference to shadow and its companion process of projection. Those pain-causing aspects of ourselves, possibly our cowardly, lustful, greedy, malicious selves, but also our generous, creative, and otherwise sublime side, get put outside our awareness because we believe them to be, well, in the too hard basket to accept. But crucially, they are still hanging around our morphic field, albeit neglected, trying to gain our attention. Some part of our psyche knows that we need to have a look at them, but we can't bear seeing them as part of ourselves. We catch 22. We thus feel compelled to put them into some other body, meaning somebody, hence we project them into another person. If that were all conducted consciously, with agreements from the person onto whom the material is being projected, it would constitute no problem in our development, or our integrity for that matter. We would just say to our friend, for example, I can't accept that I'm a highly creative, innovative person. It's just too challenging to live up to. So I'd like to transfer my creativity to you for a while. This means that I will admire you greatly for your creativity and wish that I could be the same way. You will be my hero. In fact, you do have some of my creativity and innovativeness, and that's why I chose you to carry my inner gold. Are you okay with this? And our friend would feel free to say yes or no. No drama. On the dark side, we might say, for instance, to our mother-in-law, dear mother-in-law, I have these aspects in myself, a controlling, manipulative, judgmental and critical side. I feel nauseated by them and I cannot bear thinking of myself as being this way. May I put these onto you? As I've noticed, do you have a bit of those traits as well? That way, I can just get sick to my stomach when I'm around you and still feel okay about myself. Well, our mother-in-law could accept or reject that offer. In either case, we, having consciously deposited this psychological material with the other, could then examine it for a while, as it's more easy to see when it's outside ourselves. And when we've studied it long enough and found the way to integrate it into our whole selves, we could merely go to retrieve it, saying, thank you, of course, to the person who was the carrier of our stuff. Unfortunately, most of us do not live that consciously. And not all people are so willing to take on our projections. Projection occurs as an involuntary transfer of our own unconscious behaviour to others. The operative word here is unconscious, which makes the transfer necessarily involuntary. Done at that level, we're free to deny that any such transfer took place, and these traits appear to us as qualities which exist in the other people. Note that we imagine saying to the other person, I notice that you have a bit of that too, whether it's creativity, manipulativeness, or ice skating skill. There's usually what Debbie Ford called a hook, and psychosynthesis psychotherapists and teacher Peter Hubbard calls an anchor in the recipient, the person upon whom something is being projected. Ford and other writers make a distinction between what we merely notice and what has a charge for us. Well, let's say I go to the shop to purchase some art supplies. I'm a beginning artist, so I ask the retail assistant some questions that he obviously considers very basic. He rolls his eyes heavenward, and though through very clear body language, communicates that I am insufferably ignorant about art, which I might be. But he's acting in a supremely arrogant manner with me. If I just notice his arrogance and calmly take home my paints, easel and canvas without being too bothered by the behaviour, then I'm not harbouring too much shadow of arrogance. But if I get unreasonably disturbed by his treatment of me, how dare he treat me that way, what an arrogant sod, then I've had a charge from this interaction. And really, I need to look seriously into my own shadow of arrogance. As Hubbard explains, whenever a projection is involved, it gets us. It gets under our skin. Our reaction is affect, determined, and we are therefore unable to react adequately to the person or the situation. This is one of the few basic laws of the psyche, which is without exception almost 100% foolproof. Hubbard suggests that when such an uncomfortable situation occurs and we want to know in what way we are responsible, there's a simple two-step process we can follow. One, we simply need to verbalize what gets us in the other person. For instance, we might say, she's a narcissistic old bag and I can't tolerate that. And two, then we take out the she is and put in I am, or my complex is like, and we have a description of the process at work. As Ken Wilber notes, if a person or thing informs us, we probably aren't projecting. But if it affects us, chances are that we are a victim of our own projections. So we ask, what is the right response? Personal growth writers are in complete agreement about what to do about shadow. We must, they say, overcome our fear of it. We do this by stopping the suppression of parts of ourselves and at the same time owning and embracing those aspects of which we are most afraid. We must own, that is, acknowledge and embrace, that a given quality belongs to us. Our shadow holds the essence of who we are. It contains our most treasured gifts. But we can only experience those gifts by facing the shadow aspects of ourselves. As long as we are hiding, masquerading, say, as the nice boy or the wild child or the never angry lover, and projecting outside what is inside us, there is no freedom to choose and no freedom to be. As little as we may like it, our shadow is a resource for us to expose and explore. It is desperate to be integrated into the fullness of ourselves, and until that happens, it will continue to pop up in guerrilla attacks on our life and in the most humiliating, handicapping way possible. And in the areas of life where we would least have it be. On the other hand, a right relationship with shadow offers us an invaluable gift. It leads us back to our buried potentials. Through ongoing relationship with shadow, we can attain a deeper self-acceptance. We can diffuse and even transfer negative emotions. We can gain freedom from the guilt and the toxic shame. We can identify the projections put onto others which colour the opinion of them. We can heal and elevate relationships through the willingness to honestly self-evaluate. We can better utilise the creative impetus flowing through via dreams, artwork and writing. So how do we go about romancing this shadow of ours? Here's the deal. If someone is in a body, there is shadow hanging around somewhere. What is unique and personal is how, where, and how extensive that shadow shows up in the person's life. The complex web of individual, familial, cultural, and even international factors all exert some influence on what the content of our bag of shadow contents is, making each person's bag different from all others. As a therapist, you can be attuned to where a client may need to do shadow work by listening to clues in the client's discourse, by observing what situations seem to have the greatest charge for the client, and by making specific interventions designed to help both you and your client understand where the greatest hidden treasure, the shadow, lies. You'll be more likely to spot a client's shadow at work, in their partner relationship, in their daily life, or in the course of their creative or spiritual pursuits. I'll give you examples of how shadow commonly shows up in two areas, especially important to many of us: our work and our primary relationship. First, spotting the shadow at work. Your client may present with an issue of dissatisfaction with work in general, or possibly with a particular work relationship. Shadow issues which tend to turn up in a work context are those related to success, power, competence, and workaholism. And for example, of work shadow, let me introduce you to Alan, who faced into the shadow of power and competence. Imagine you have a moment that you have a client, imagine at the moment you have a client named Alan, who comes to you with the complaint that even though he sees himself as a modest, easygoing but hard-working employee, he's troubled by restlessness, work dissatisfaction, and unusually for him, diminished energy, enthusiasm and drive for work. In the first few sessions with Alan, you sense from several of his comments that he has unresolved aspirations to positions of power. Yet you find it difficult to visualize him in a senior management position. So clear is Alan's demeanour of inadequacy. Alan's under no illusions. His lust for a higher management position is more than he will be likely to achieve in the foreseeable future. You wonder what sort of boss would fit an employee like Alan. Well, your suspicion is confirmed when Alan talks about how John, his boss, is power-hungry, hard-driving and occasionally arrogant. Weirdly, it fits Alan, who's been accommodating John and even grovelling, but whose anxiety and resentment has increased with each kowtowing act. For a while, Alan insisted the relationship with John worked more or less well, but lately Alan finds John intolerable. When you think about it, the whole thing seems quite clear to you. For quite some time, Alan was able to project onto John his shadow feelings of power, arrogance and competence. But denying our own power and competence can only work for so long. Eventually, the repressed qualities begin to show up sort of sideways, and they did so in Alan's work, partly as the restlessness and dissatisfaction he describes. But when Alan confesses that he has taken extra sick days and has been involved in embezzling small amounts of funds, you realise that maybe he's trying to steal back his inner gold, long ago projected onto his boss. You realise that your work with Alan is shadow work. The goal of helping Alan to acknowledge and embrace his disowned shadow of inner authority and capacity. You get Alan's agreement to take a trip to his shadow storehouse to see what repressed feelings and perceptions might be entangled there with issues of power and competence. And the major way of spotting shadow in relationship is by observing. The shadow dance of partnering. They say that opposites attract. Couples fall in love enthralled by the 180-degree different traits in the other person. Romantic comedies depict this process in uproariously funny and touching ways. The movies usually end, however, before the part where the couple has to learn how to live with, adjust and adapt, and mostly tolerate those differences that seemed so cute or sweet or at least interesting in the beginning. The getting on with it long term is the part of the drama that you get to see when one of both turn up in your therapy rooms, disillusioned, disenthralled and disbelieving that the storybook romance could go so horribly wrong, when no one told them that it was a choice for partnering, that is generally a choice for meeting their shadow. The cynic's view of romance, upheld in couples counselling quite often, is that those wonderful feelings of love, warmth and bliss in the courtship phase are just a set-up to attract us enough to engage the relationship, which gets us to do work on our shadow. There are multiple steps in the shadow dance of partnering, but they all move to the same beat, the tricky rhythm of shadow holding for one another. We'll follow through a common example, show you how it sort of manifests. There's a strict rule in this form of dance. The qualities that attract each other in the beginning are the exact same ones that will be identified later as a source of conflict. The qualities don't change, but they will be relabeled, later to be referred as the really difficult, bad things about my partner. Let's look in on the relationship of Alana and Bruce. Blessed with a head for business, as bright as her winsome personality, Alana has owned her own boutique for several years, and when Bruce wandered in one day, wow. Customer service broadened into conversation, which blossomed into romance, and eventually marriage. Bruce was entranced with Alana's savvy, efficiency, organisational skills, and sales and marketing prowess. With her high-stress lifestyle, Alana found comfort in the laid-back, go-with-the-flow spontaneity of Bruce, a farmer whose clock did not tick in minutes or hours, but according to the dictates of seasons and Mother Nature. While the couple faced a few challenges in their first year of marriage, it was nothing like what followed later. Turning up in your therapy rooms for couples counselling, Alana conceded a last-ditch effort to save the marriage. They looked defeated, washed out, they looked miserable. So Alana headed off the proceedings, complaining that Bruce was incapable of making any decisions at all, let alone timely ones. He was completely disorganised, she said, slow-moving. He was as sloppy and dirty as one of his pigs. And he just didn't get things. Insights that were totally obvious to her quick mind went right over his head. Alana made these statements in a crisp, cool manner without a trace of emotion. Looking embarrassed, Bruce was slow to speak up, but when he did, you could perceive clear anger about his perception, that no matter what was happening, Alana was always trying to hurry him up. If he came in from the paddocks with mud on his boots, he left them, with the socks, at the door, intending to retrieve them for the next day's labour. But they were never there when he went back. The socks had been whisked away to the laundry, and the shoes were put outside where they belong, so not to dirty Alana's immaculate home. And it really felt like her home. She had made most of the decisions about decorating, because she said Bruce could never make his mind up about what he wanted. If they were at a party, Bruce said, Alana demanded to go home at whatever hour she had set. Even if they were having a good time, or she was having a good time. She's driven, he concluded. She's driving me mad. So what's happening here? Well, as you could imagine, further work with the couple made it all too obvious, and eventually clear to them as well, that Alana had disowned her relaxed, emotional, nature-attuned side. Bruce was holding this bit of inner gold for her. For his part, Bruce had seemed to cast into shadow the part of himself that was decisive, clever and ambitious, instead projecting those qualities onto Alana. It's worked for a while in the honeymoon phase of the marriage. I mean, each could still admire their disavowed but projected onto the other traits. Eventually, however, that solution came to be unworkable, and their respective psyches demanded the reclaiming of their wholeness. Conflict ensued. Thus, Alana and Bruce had begun the shadow dance of partnering. What Alana and Bruce, like most couples, did not realise is that both sets of needs exist within both of them. The result is that both of them transfer what is basically an inner intrapersonal phenomenon, really going on within the psyche of each, to an interpersonal conflict played out now between them. They do this in 3 steps. One person's disavowed, denied inner experience is projected onto the partner, and then the denied material is perceived as existing in the partner, and the partner is encouraged by cues and provocations to act as if the material were there. The projector can then identify vicariously with the partner's expression of the rejected beliefs, behaviours, emotions. Projections tend to be exchanges, traits, you might say, of denied parts of the self, which both members of the couple have agreed to make. Then each one sees in the partner what cannot be perceived in the self and struggles relentlessly to change it. Your work as a therapist will be in 2 parts. 1, to help disbelieving couples understand that what seems so very clearly a major flaw in the partner is often merely the projected shadow of themselves. Secondly, to help them do the therapeutic work of embracing it, or at least agreeing to stop flogging their partner for it. Note, the shadow shows up in many places. It's all too common in everyday life. From daydreams, Freudian slips, to jokes laughed at or not laughed at. Shadow oozes into every corner of our lives. Similarly, you don't need to look hard to find it in its natural hiding place amidst creative and spiritual endeavours. For more in-depth looks at how this happens, I actually encourage you to join the Mental Health Academy's website by visiting their website, as you could see on the URL below, and subscribing to the Sitting with Shadow course. You'll find it very interesting, very helpful. But to give you something practical to take away with you today, I'd like to share with you 2 exercises that you can use either on yourself or with clients doing shadow work. Exercise 1, the letter writing game. You can help clients identify unacknowledged projected shadow through this exercise, in which the client is to set aside about 30 minutes to write 2 letters according to the following instructions. You say to your client, letter number 1 is addressed to someone with whom you have an intense emotional charge, someone you dislike, judge, or disapprove of. That person can be a friend, colleague, family member, or even a public figure you may not personally know. You will be describing things that you dislike about the person, including the reasons why you dislike those things. For example, you might say, I despise your narcissistic streak. You think it's all about you. Or, I loathe how greedy you are, gobbling up all the goodies at parties before anyone else has even had a chance to know the food is served. Now, letter number 2. This is addressed to someone you admire. Write in this letter everything that you love and admire about the person, again, in specific detail. You must write it as though you are speaking directly to the person. So you might say, for example, I just love how you naturally put people at ease. It's a real skill. Or, I'm enthralled with your capacity for coming up with creative solutions that all the parties in the discussion can agree to. Now, read the letters in front of a mirror, substituting I for every you and my for every mine for your or yours. In other words, you're to read the letters as though they are both addressed to you. Invite the client to bring his or her insights and reactions to the session after having done this, as there will be rich shadow material for processing. Now, there's one more step, and it is important. The client must allow some time to sit in stillness, focusing on the breath or perhaps putting attention to the heart center, and invite your client to ask that his or her most inclusive self, sense of self, be present within. The client is to offer the person described in both letters, that is, both his and her dark side and also the light side, to that self, requesting that the self put into equilibrium any imbalances and help the client find a way to use the gifts hidden in the shadow for the benefits of everyone. Instruct the client that once the offering is made, he or she is to stay alert in the hours and days that follow for any subtle shifts in energy. You can ask, are there any changes in the way you see other people or how you see yourself? Positive spinning for shadow qualities. The second exercise is a reframing one. For this exercise, get your client to start by naming 5 qualities that he or she has been forced to consider may be part of his or her shadow. The consideration may have come about because of feedback the client has had from others, a dawning of awareness on their own part, in some way they've acted out these qualities, or merely a result of the client taking on board the psychological law that whatever he or she reacts to emotionally indicates a hiding place of shadow. Whichever way it comes about, it doesn't matter. But once the traits are on your client's radar, the aim is to reflect in as dispassionate, or disidentified way as possible whether these qualities are 100% negative, that is, limiting, or whether they might serve some purpose if understood in a somewhat different light. Here are some examples of some of these qualities reframed. Now, if your client is dealing with a shadow of not goal-oriented, the client may also may be able to reframe this as going with the flow, enjoying life in the present. If your client is dealing with the shadow of being not grounded, being a space cadet, the client may be able to reframe this as involved in realms above the physical, that is, the metaphysical and spiritual. If your client is dealing with a shadow of being too idealistic, wanting to save the whole planet, then the client might be able to reframe that as having a higher purpose, having his or her life stand for something meaningful. If your client is dealing with a shadow of acting fiscally irresponsible, the client may be able to reframe that as not being so fixated on savings and investments that he or she is missing the joy of the present. That is the attitude of, save for a rainy day, but don't miss all the sunshine. Once the client gets the hang of putting a positive spin on formerly disowned traits, you can help him or her move to the next level with that. And that's examining whether a given trait is enhancing or hindering the client's life within the context of which it occurs. Well, for instance, in the space cadet example above, the client's capacity to go receptive to inspiration and creative visualization are very useful traits in order to bring into being innovative concepts and technologies. But if the way this quality is manifesting is only that the rent and the electricity have not been paid for several months, then the client may wish to rethink his or her space cadetness. Your challenge to the client can be, okay, you've identified a certain tendency in yourself, such as being a daydreamer or not being grounded, for example. How can we recruit this natural tendency in you to help your life work better? What might you be able to do to cooperate with this tendency so that it comes into form in a life-enhancing way? For the times when the tendency emerges from the shadow in a seemingly negative way, what might you need to do to continue embracing it as part of yourself? And so on. I think you get the idea. To accept the whole of ourselves, we can, and perhaps must, practice accepting the parts of ourselves. How we language those parts has a significant impact on whether we send them to shadow or not. This video lecture has defined psychological shadow as those aspects which we cannot bear for others to see and thus cast into the hidden domain of ourselves. The context and the contents of our shadow are both the negative and also positive qualities which we feel uncomfortable to claim. With both, what goes into storage within us is highly conditioned by our early environment. Our continuing growth towards wholeness demands that we examine the contents of our shadow storehouse. But because we've locked away these aspects of ourselves, shadow tends to be experienced indirectly as a projection onto others of what belongs with us. There are psychological laws for how the phenomenon of projection occurs, and they involve unconscious agreements between the projector and the recipient. I noted that shadow shows up in all sectors of our lives and gave examples of how it can manifest at work, in partnerships, and significant others. Shadow work leads to a life of integrity. Gandhi once wrote, that the only devils in the world are those running around in our own hearts. And that this is where our battles should be fought. We can, and our clients can, direct that battle such that our behaviour produces no remorse and our choices last the distance. This is possible if our choices are clear and we make them consciously. Awareness of our shadow can dissolve its unconscious power over our choices, thus allowing us to take responsibility for creating the kind of world we want to live in. For information on shadow work, transference and projection, visit the Mental Health Academy's website and become a member. As a member, you can subscribe to a range of courses exploring these subjects and enjoy over 150 hours of professional development. It is these hours, these changes, these differences, these variations, these understandings, that is what creates the wonderful therapist that I know we all are and can be. Thank you.